Well, welcome to the first constituent meeting of the 25 legislative session. And I want to say thank you for being here. And it's great to see so many faces. I talk to my colleagues all the time that do similar things that we do here, and sometimes in different formats. And a lot of times they don't get that many folks, and so I really enjoy the fact that people are interested in being here and having a conversation. For those of you that haven't been here before, well, we'll do one of these every month. I think it's the last Tuesday of each month right now, but you might want to check the calendar. And it's for an hour, and we'll talk a little bit about what we do, what our roles are as legislators, and the committees that we're on. And then it's really about opening it up to you folks and for questions or just discussion around issues, comments. We try to make sure we involve everyone and make sure everyone has an opportunity to ask a question if they want to ask a question. And oh, by the way, can you hear me okay? Everyone can hear me okay?
Pretty good. Very.
People sometimes say I'm soft-spoken, that's why I'm saying that.
Yeah, you can speak up a little.
I'll try. Okay. You can move up too. So, anyway, I'm Trevor Squirrell, and this will be my 9th year in the State House. It is my 9th year in the State House. My first 4 years I spent on House Natural Resources. I have a real passion around environmental issues. And I'm going into my 5th year on appropriations now. And in appropriations, the committee members have budget portfolios that we're responsible for. And in my case, I've actually had the same ones since I joined the committee. One is the criminal justice system. So that's the courts, the judiciary, it's state's attorneys, it's the defendant general, it's crime victim services, Department of Corrections, anything you think it might be connected to the criminal justice system. And the other one is the Agency of Natural Resources, which is all the environmental pieces that are out there, whether that be Department of Environmental Conservation, Forest Parks and Recreation, Fish and Wildlife, and also the Natural Resources Board, which is the Act 250 arm, which is now the Land Use Review Board, which got changed. So that's my main standing committee. I also chair the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, which is a year-round committee. We meet once a week during session and every couple of weeks outside of a session. Our role is to work with departments and agencies, making sure that when they do rulemaking, in other words, when legislators pass bills, they need to get implemented, and that's what the departments and agencies do. They write rules. And we follow the Administrative Procedures Act, make sure that the departments and agencies are doing what they need to be doing, following legislative intent, doing public meetings, and getting feedback from folks as they implement laws. For the most part, that's pretty straightforward, but every once in a while we get something controversial, which makes life really interesting. The other thing about that committee, from my perspective, is that it covers a whole gamut of government, as my appropriations job does too. So we get to see it all, even though I have specific responsibilities in appropriations. We do see every department and agency in our committee. What we're working on right now, the House always takes up budget issues first before the Senate does. And in January, our fiscal year is from July 1st till June 30th of this year. When we come back in session in January, there's an opportunity for departments and agencies to make a mid-year correction to their budgets. In other words, something that's unforeseen. Sometimes somehow something doesn't get done in the budget. It also has a lot to do with our consensus forecast, whether we have surpluses or whether we're running deficits. We happen to be running surpluses right now. We just had a forecast the other day where we have $63 million more than we thought we had. So that's a good thing, but we also need to be cautious because we know that that's not going to continue over time. So our job right now, we're working on the Budget Adjustment Act, and we'll vote on it, probably do a straw poll at the end of this week, vote it out next week, put it on the floor, and then it'll go over to the Senate for their deliberation. Today, the governor was in the State House and provided the FY26 budget proposal from the administration. So we had that this afternoon. And that's a $9 billion budget. Keep that in perspective. And so we started to have that conversation this afternoon, and we'll be working on that over the next few months. So that's sort of where I am right now.
Great. Hi, I'm Edye Graning. I am starting my second biennium, so my third year at the State House. I serve on the Commerce and Economic Development Committee, and I am the vice chair this year of that committee. We work on all of the financial regulation. We oversee the departments that do that, workforce development, economic development, all kinds of all kinds of things like that. So how do we bring in more business? How do we support business development? How do we make sure that there's workforce? We're actually looking at workforce housing right now because that's one of the big things that's stopping our workforce from developing. So we try to find what the root causes are and focus on those things. I have a bill that we're probably have coming out of our committee this week. So modification to the law where we now have the Office of Workforce Expansion and Development. It is a new cabinet position, and Sabina Haskell was recently appointed into that position, and that came out of our committee last session, worked with the Senate, worked with the governor's office, worked with an off-session committee to put that together, and then they continued working, so talking about how we work together sometimes, right? We've all been doing all of this together. Just really clearly helping to focus that more so that we can have better workforce alignment in the state. So somebody to look at all of the different programs and make sure that we don't have gaps. We're not duplicating efforts in places that it doesn't make sense, right? If it's different areas, different populations, maybe we have to run the same program a little differently, but we just want to make sure that we're supporting the workforce and supporting business in the state. So that's the committee that I work on.
So we'll open up for questions or comments. Yes?
I have a question.
If you'll also introduce yourself by name, that'd be great.
Thank you. Bob Mulcahy. And it may not be in an area that you have expertise. But I don't understand the Green Mountain Care Board issue where the medical center generated $100 million more than budget. So they're going to be penalized this year, and they have to reduce staffing and reduce programs they offer. In the private sector, if you do $100 million more than budget, you get congratulated, even in nonprofits. So how does that work? What's going on there?
You want to take a stab at that one?
You're right, it's not the expertise of either one of us sitting
Yeah,
up
okay.
here. It's interesting that the Green Mountain Care Board, which is an organization that oversees the hospitals and what have you, actually Owen Foster is a
Jericho resident.
Is a Jericho resident constituent in this area. I don't claim to understand it. I think it's really about they have to have their budget essentially approved and the rate setting and stuff like that. And so I think the assumption is, and it may be a poor assumption, that somehow they've exceeded that, right? And if they exceeded that, did they charge more than what they should be charging for services and things like that? And we all understand the cost of health care these days, whether it's in terms of premiums or in terms of services. I can try to get a better answer than that, but
I can fill in a little,
Yeah,
but I
okay.
will also say that healthcare is not my area of expertise, and I'm going to be very upfront about that. But the Green Mountain Care Board's job, whether you think it's working right now or not, is to keep the cost of healthcare down in the state of Vermont, right? So that's why I said it like that. And so when there is an area that is exceeding their revenues, the care board is looking at that and saying, are you keeping costs down if your revenues are exceedingly high? And so the hospital is choosing to react in a way that is, we can't provide services, but that's not the care board telling them they can't. The care board is saying, your revenues are too high, how do we keep costs down? So there's two different places that the information is coming from, and that's how the story is unfolding, right? So I don't have the detail. If I had any thoughts on how to fix our healthcare problem, I would be sharing them, and this is an area that I really need to understand better, but that's the base, that's what the care board is supposed to do. The hospital is advocating for their programs in a way that they feel is the best way to advocate for their programs. So that's
Thank you.
yeah.
Just to add on to that, there has been a consultant's report that was just delivered to the Green Mountain Care Board in the fall, I believe, which created its own set of controversy. There's a lot of stakeholders involved, and they all have their opinions about what they're saying. But so that's being looked at right now, reviewed, discussed. Questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Wait for the mic, please.
Sorry. Excuse me, sorry, thank you.
And Bob, if you'd introduce yourself, that would be great.
Okay, hi, my name is Robert, or Bob DeVost. I live over on Milo White here in Jericho. First of all, I'm going to start out with the good news. Trevor and I have exchanged a couple emails recently, and I appreciate his feedback on an issue I think that's pretty important. So I appreciate him taking the time. He's been pretty good about that over the last several weeks, and again, I appreciate that. My issue is probably one that faces all of us, and I think the number one issue, affordability. Okay, my wife and I were both retired, and luckily we could keep our heads above water or whatever. But almost every cost of living, be it home insurance or whatever you're paying, is in the double-digit range. I could go down a list, but I won't. So my issue is affordability, and there's an issue right now for seniors, which is House Bill 74. House Bill 74 is, over the course, the way it's laid out right now, over 8 years, they hope to phase out counting Social Security as income. And as most of us may know, Vermont is one of the few states that tax not Social Security directly, but they tax it as income. So I'd really like to hear, I know you're both not sponsors of the bill. I understand very little, maybe a little bit, but a little bit about politics. You're both on one side of the aisle. I'm sure you have to be honest with you, wait for marching orders to go forward kind of thing or whatever on this. But I'd like to know where you both stand on age 74. I know it's only in committee, but we need more people to stand up and just voice that it's extremely hard as far as affordability issues in Vermont. Thank you.
I can start this one.
Okay.
Once a bill is, because I got an email about this also, once a bill is introduced, you can't add sponsorship. So sometimes you hear about a bill coming forward before it gets turned in, sometimes you don't. Sometimes people ask for sponsors to join them, sometimes they don't. So whether our name is sponsoring a bill or not, I guess if our name is not on a bill, it doesn't mean that we don't support the issue. So please ask us. That's, it's really important if our name is on the bill, then we approved it when it was written, but a committee can change it too, and then it might come out of that committee in a way that doesn't make sense for us. So our name on a bill really only means that we agree with the language of the bill when it is submitted to the House. I think so. So please, ask us. Please don't just assume. I think this is a hard one because affordability is a priority, and we have to understand. One of the things my committee does is try to figure out how to keep more Vermonters who are graduating from our college system and who are from our high schools to stay here. How do we make it affordable so that they can have a place to live, have a job, and be part of the workforce and be. So this is something that I talk about in committee all the time. Taxes is something that a different committee talks about more, Ways and Means, and so I'm not privy to the detailed discussions on that. But if they can figure out a way to make that be part of a package that keeps Vermont more affordable, I'm all for that. That's really it's just how do we don't have that many people, we don't have that many sources of income, so how do we support the lifestyle that we have, the services that we have in the state, and decrease taxes? And that's really the balance that we try to work through every year. So I don't know if that directly answers your question, but I think that gives you some.
Well, my concern is when you mentioned we don't have enough revenue or taxes, if you will, my belief is most of us, I think, can spend our own money better sometimes than the government can. It's how you perceive the issue. If you look at it like the government doesn't have enough revenue, we can't give up Social Security money that we can tax as revenue. Why isn't it looked at that Vermonters can keep what they get with Social Security just to keep up with everyday expenses? It doesn't. Government programs don't have to be an answer for everything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just I hear the philosophy of.
Sure. So what we do is we make sure that people who make less money are taxed less, and people who make more money are taxed more. And that is one of the ways that we do try to make Vermont affordable, right? So, if it's Social Security on top of pension, on top of other income, right? That's somebody who is in a different tax bracket. And should we be discounting their tax bill more than somebody who is, on a different end of the, so I think all of that really has to get balanced.
The last thing, I don't want to.
Can I respond also?
But if there's over 40.
Bob, can I just respond also? Well, to E's point, she's right about sponsoring or not sponsoring bills. I support some change in the taxable nature of Social Security and also with military pensions. I'm not so sure I'd want to go as far as what 874 is going because there's a cost. And right now the estimated cost is about $54 million a year when it's fully rolled up. That's not insignificant dollars. And so I'm not sure where I'll be on that when the bill goes through. I'm sure it'll get taken up. I will say that the governor's budget today asked for an increase in the exemption on Social Security, an additional $5,000 on individuals and an additional $10,000 on couples. So I went from, I'm not going to get it right, 50 to 55, maybe 60 to 70, single versus couple. So it's not going where you want it to go. I understand that, but that was put out by the governor, Republican governor, and the other one was military pensions. Now he's wanting to exempt it fully. This was taken up a couple of years ago. We ended up exempting 10,000, I believe, on military pensions. I was willing to go to 20, sort of a midpoint, but not go all the way where it was for folks that make quite a bit out of their pensions. So that option wasn't offered to me in that situation. So I voted for the 10,000. So those are both out there and are on the table. And what I will say to everyone that's in this room, regardless of the topic that we're talking about, if you have that interest in that topic, yes, you should talk to us. But if you know that a certain committee is taking up that bill, right, in case of these will be Ways and Means Committee on both of these issues, then you should also, speak out to them and get involved with them also.
I mentioned one thing. I did do that to all members. I've only got 3 responses so far.
Yeah. Well, one of my colleagues, Representative Harrison, said he got a an email from you. He let me know that, so. He's the vice chair of my committee.
Did the $10,000 get passed for
I'm sorry?
veterans? Is that law? The first $10,000 of a,
That's my understanding. I'll need to go back and maybe double check that. I don't
I'm
want
just curious.
to speak out of turn. I think it did. I think the first,
I didn't serve long enough to get a picture, so it doesn't matter.
I think the majority of folks are in that 20,000 range when I was looking at it before. But then there's a setup there that they're higher than that, so. Anyway, I appreciate your point. The other thing about affordability too, we certainly have been hit hard the last couple of years with inflation. And that sort of that tension. And there are some items, I won't get into detail, some items in the governor's budget to take some of the surplus that we have to buy down some of these tax rates. But I don't really want to get into it at this point because I think it requires a lot more conversation. A lot of it has to do with property taxes. So, anyway. Yes?
Hi, my name's Jess Hoskins. We live over off of Raceway Road. I'm curious to hear both of your thoughts about the proposal from Secretary Saunders and the governor about the redistricting proposal. Just for a little bit of context, we have 2 kids in public school here. I'm an administrator in a neighboring district, and my husband is a special educator in this district. And I feel like I'm living and dying this ed finance stuff, as I'm sure you are too, on the school board. And being pulled as a taxpayer and as an administrator who's facing really big cuts in my school. And I would like to hear what you think about what they have to say.
You're definitely the expert on this.
So what I will say is that everybody is waiting for more detail, and the details matter on this. Simplifying us to a smaller number of districts, there's no guarantee that it saves money. What it does do is it simplifies a very complicated system that we have, which will save some money, right? Just any simplification in general will. So we could do it in a way that makes it worse, but just, we'll go there. So without more detail, it's really hard to weigh in on how it's going to impact any of us, our wallets, our children, our teachers, our schools, where, our transportation to schools, our opportunity for school. There is not enough information to do anything right now. And so we're waiting on, again, the Ways and Means Committee to really look at how this new funding formula could work, right? It could come out in a way that the state tells us how much money we get for the number of students that we have, and there's no budget vote anymore. That could be where we end up, right? It could end up something very different from that. So, because we have the Brigham decision, we have all kinds of issues with that. We have the education committees looking at what is the goal and how do we set up systems. If we're going to make a change, it's an opportunity to set up systems in a way that is better for students. So really be student-centered, make sure we have outcomes that make sense. Right now, our graduation requirements are different by district or by school, depending if it's a supervisory union. We don't have statewide graduation requirements. So it's an opportunity for us to set more statewide standards. It's an opportunity to look at all kinds of things. So I have lots of thoughts, but I don't know that any of them is helpful right now. I'm just trying to ask people questions to get more information and get more detail. So unsatisfying, but kind of where we are, 1 week in.
I think that's what I've been saying to my faculty all week.
Yeah.
And with my parent hat on, like the big picture idea of fewer districts, I think is fine. Every individual I've interacted with in the AOE is a good person who entered the field of education for the right reasons. And with my administrator hat on, it's been really difficult to
the system in the AOE is not functioning at full strength, I
Yeah,
guess.
the agency is down, I think, 22 positions,
Yeah.
which I think they have 22 vacancies in the agency right now. So it's hard for them to do the work on this also, right?
Yeah.
To flesh out the detail. Yeah, and we're a volunteer legislature with varying levels of understanding of education in Vermont. Although the education committee actually, in the House, actually has a lot of experience in education. So it's, I hope we don't do anything fast to just do something, because I think this is something that will have long-term consequences, and we have to be thoughtful about the order that we do it. And we really have to understand what the end result is that we want and move toward that together. I think there's a lot of desire right now to work together with the administration, the House, and the Senate, and I'm really optimistic about that. So.
I appreciate them putting it out there, because it feels like for a really long time, there's just been like, this is a problem, and now is there something to look at that we can debate about as a solution?
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that, and certainly this is not my expertise, and I haven't read the documents that have been provided to us. I had to be out of the State House the day that they did the big reveal, if you will. But I think each week they're trying to add more detail. They're taking sections of the conversation and adding more detail to that. And I think that's what Edye was speaking to understand a little bit more about what it is they're putting on the table so we can have that conversation, right? And I was at an event the other day and a few people asked me what I thought. And I said, it's hard for me right now to know. You know, we sit in a school district that's the best in the state, right? Well, by all measures.
I have split allegiances between where
Anyway.
I live and where I live.
But, you know, it certainly is considered the best in the state, or at the top of its game in terms of schools in Vermont, okay? And I certainly, in my communications and conversations with folks in the district, get a lot of positive feedback about our district and what we do. So in some ways, you know, I'm also very concerned about the impact of any changes that take place for this school district also. And these are the kinds of thoughts and conversations that everybody's having, right? And because, you know, going from 100 and some, well, how many districts do we have now? Close to 100?
More than.
Yeah, going to 5. I mean, that's a huge change.
Yeah.
At the same time, I have a couple of kids that have families and live in Denver. They have 90,000 students. I think Vermont has 87,000 students, and they have one school district. But appreciate that that's a city, right? It's not what Vermont is, but it is a very different environment. So, thanks for the question. Yes?
I just have a clarification
Yeah.
that I need with that. You keep saying,
Sorry, Nancy Carlson. You said several times you're waiting for them to release more details. Who's them?
Well, in this case, it was the Agency of Education.
Okay,
They're the ones that came with the proposal from the administration to do this, right? That's what they're putting out there. And so they're coming into committees every week with a different piece of it, providing more detail. So apologize for saying them, but it's the Agency of Education.
okay, so now there's another question. Why are they down so many people?
I don't have an answer for that. I think there has been, I mean, well, so if you start with the fact that they were with an interim leader while they were searching for a new leader for 9 months, and then they had a next secretary announced, and then didn't get confirmation, and then so there's been a lot of turnover, a lot of instability at the top, and I think that level of change is an issue. I think there have been, there have been issues with salaries that have not been at the standard for a good school district in the state. So if you want to hire somebody to go to the agency and have a bigger purview or work, so I think there have been a lot of issues. I don't know today why, but I know historically, the last 2-3 years why.
The Agency of Education seems to have a more difficult problem, and again, I'm not sure why. There has been a fair amount of instability, as Edye has said, but I will say that when you look at state government in general, we have a workforce problem just like everybody else does. With Agency of Natural Resources, which is one of the bigger departments, they have a $320 million budget, and I was just reviewing some programs with them that have been stood up over the last couple of years, particularly with all the federal money coming in, and looking at how under-resourced all these programs are. And just in the programs that I was looking at, which was probably about 10 of them, I could probably count over 20 people that they still needed to effectively run those programs. So, yeah, it's not specific to AOE, but I think they've had a lot more instability than a lot of other agencies and departments at least over the last decade or so.
So I have a thought, comes back to Bob here. Is there a way to tap into seniors and have part-time jobs or something in some of these positions to alleviate some of this problem?
So so our committee has oversight over the Department of Labor, which, as many of you may know, has had a lot of issue filling their staff over the recent years. And we've had some bumps getting people in, unemployment insurance payments and, other. So when we talk to them, the system to get hired in state government takes a minimum of 3 months, and that's with a position that is already clear and determined and has a good job description. So, and then there are issues with, is it a permanent position? Is it a temporary position? So there are lots of, it's a government job, and we have talked to last session, we talked to the Human Resources Department and for the state of Vermont to see how do you lower some of these hurdles to make it easier. I know that the Department of Corrections, because workforce, we've talked to them, and they made a couple of changes with this HR system, and we're able to hire people in much faster, and they're working on closing their gap because they are also, they have been struggling with getting people. So I think, yes, right? Like there should be more ways to get the people in Vermont in some of these jobs to do some of this work. And we need to be more creative. And as a legislature, we can ask the questions, but this is a procedural thing. I don't know that we want to change the law on who you have to hire. I think that it might not make things better.
Well, isn't the flip side, this must be saving us millions of dollars every year, right?
It actually is saving us a lot of money in the short term.
In the short term, I agree.
But you're also not delivering the programs,
Yeah.
and you're not efficient. And one of the things that I looked at over the last couple of years is that our Human Resources Department, and this is through Tristan, a colleague of mine who's not there anymore, there's a dashboard you can go look at, right, for state government and employment and stuff like that. And when you start teasing out things, you start to realize that the turnover is very significant in state government right now. As a matter of fact, it's as high as 40% don't make it through a year.
Wow.
And when you think about the cost involved
Yeah.
in hiring folks, but also training folks and then having them leave, don't know what the answer is to that necessarily. Because again, I think it's a problem that's not just specific to state government right now in our current environment with workforce. So, but that's just really striking, quite frankly. Other questions, comments?
I just had a side question. Were you mentioning work? I'm not sure where you,
Well,
You
it
mentioned-
just- we seem to have a lot of older people in the state who
Right.
have skills, who don't want to probably work full-time or drive to Montpelier. So
Right.
if we could figure out how to connect the two, you
Right.
know, the need of the state and the people who,
But I'm not, I got a little lost there because I'm not seeking work. I'm retired.
oh, I know you're not
so I kind
seeking
of-
work.
I'm not- I'm not-
You
I got-
want
when
to
you
solve
mentioned-
your financial problem.
But
So,
I think everyone has financial concerns.
Oh,
I'm not
absolutely.
here to beg poverty or anything like
Oh,
that.
no,
or
no,
whatever.
no.
But anyway, I just,
no, but I just thought, you know,
no,
there's a
I-
possibility here.
Right. I got a little lost when you mentioned my name. I thought I'm more just advocating for those of us that can collect Social Security. I understand high brackets, yes, they should pay whatever, if you will, or whatever, but there are many of us in a middle range-ish that it's an important benefit. And Vermont, I just think Vermont should not tax it to a great degree. I mean, it's more taking money. I just think Vermont has a spending problem. I mean, again, we go back to revenue. You know, we need more revenue, we need more programs, we need this, we need that. Well, some of us can live somewhat independently and do not want to be anywhere near government dependent for programs. So if you want many to retire in dignity, you would allow them to keep money that has been afforded to them. And again, I'm not just dependent on Social Security, I do have other resources or whatever, but it's more, I guess it's more a government philosophy thing. I mean, if you think government's gonna solve the problem, you're gonna have more programs, you can take more money, you can spend it more and more programs, make more people dependent, so be it. But I think if you're allowed that money, and that was a democratic program back in the day, by the way, and now Vermont, again, there's probably, 37 other states that do not tax Social Security as income. And, you know, if it just seems like if Vermont can bleed you dry in taxes, they're gonna do it. And I think that's a wrong way to go, especially if you're looking for affordability.
You know, one of the things it's interesting to me, we've had a Republican governor for a while now. One of his positions is no taxes, no fees, okay? And setting the tax issue aside, we have a lot of fees in state government that specific to a program or to an activity that someone is involved with directly, okay? And it helps fund those programs and those activities. And we've always in state government had an agreement between the legislature and the administration that every year a third of the agencies and departments would submit a fee bill for those programs and activities to support them, because inflation at a minimum is going to increase the cost, right? So absent that, we spend a lot of money in the budget backfilling programs because they don't have sufficient resources, because they're not raising the money through the fees, which I think are a better way to fund those programs if it directly connected to the person that's involved in that activity, okay? So what happens is we end up having to take general fund resources to backfill those programs if we think they're important, which impacts all taxpayers that may not have anything to do with that activity. So I put that out there also as part of a conversation. Other questions? Yes.
I have a comment about the topic you're just addressing. I moved here from a southern state. I'm sorry. My name's Pat Bird. I live off of Packard Road. I moved here from a southern state, which does not tax Social Security, has a very low overall tax rate. It's an inexpensive place to live compared to Vermont, and I can see that readily. However, the benefits that I received from that state were considerably lower. For instance, that state is ranked in the 40-something in terms of the public education that is made available in that state. That's a direct result of the priorities. It's a direct result of deciding how much we're going to pay to provide services for the community. And I think I know people who are interested in moving south because it's cheaper, and I certainly respect that, and I understand the weather and all that sort of thing. But the conversation I have with them is, that's all well and good. Just be sure that you're looking at the whole picture. The whole picture. You'll be surprised at the cost comparison of things. For instance, my homeowner's insurance in Kentucky, for a relatively comparable piece of property in terms of appraised value, was 5 times what it is here in Vermont. Now, I don't know why that is, but my suspicion is because Vermont probably doesn't let insurance companies charge whatever they feel like. So it's just that we just need to take a breath and think about what our priorities are and what we're willing to sacrifice to achieve those priorities for the community. So I'll get off my soapbox. I just wanted to make that comment.
Other questions or comments? Yeah.
Does anybody know, my name's Eric Bishop, how much money we're talking about? The Social Security, taxing Social Security?
Well, the analysis that I saw on the front end of this conversation about page 74 is that even though it goes out 8 years, it's going to, the first year I think it would go up $10,000 or something like that, and it would go up to 130 or 140,000. Is about $5 or $6 million for that $10,000 change, right? And I think it was estimated that if it had happened all at once, it'd be about a $50 million bill. Okay, so again, in my mind, that's not insignificant. Okay, but I agree with Bob. I think there's room for us to compromise on this and to address the concerns that he raises. Do I think it should go to 130, 140, 150? No, I don't. Because I don't think those folks need that full exemption. But is it 90? Is it 100? I'm not sure, okay? So, and so at some point we're willing to say that's worth it to us as a state to do that in order to support folks in that. So I hope that helps. And it's the same thing with the military pensions, right? It doesn't come without a cost to do those things, so.
I think there was a question in front
Yeah.
here. Did you have the mic's coming?
Hi, thanks. Mike Hudson, Underhill. This kind of gets into the minutia of regulations, and I'm not sure what influence you have over particular regulations, but the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, recently, I'm not sure exactly when, if it was last year or 2 or 3 years ago, changed the regulation with regard to rust on rotors, brake rotors. And I've heard about this from friends who have experienced having to replace rotors due to inspection, which cost several $100s.
More.
And I thought, that's kind of
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
So anyway, I had to do the same thing today, and on a 2-year-old vehicle, and there's absolutely no safety risk associated with it. So I would just implore whatever advice or influence you might have to bring some rationale to regulations that bring no benefit and only bring cost, unnecessary cost.
You said that happened today?
Mhm.
Yeah. Because it was interesting, as you were speaking, I was thinking that it was an issue that was identified a couple of years ago when they
And I
made.
thought we addressed it
I thought we
last
addressed that.
year.
So.
I
it-
would go, so the issue is supposed to not allow cars whose brakes could fail to be on the road. What it has turned into is some of the repair shops were so concerned that they could be penalized for allowing cars to drive that have some rust, being overzealous in their identification of rust on brakes. So
That point
Yes.
was brought out,
yes,
and the regulation specifies the amount of rust, which is the limit, and that's what they're working with. I cannot question or debate a technician who is inspecting a rotor against a regulation. They're doing their job. Because if they don't do their job correctly, according to the regulation, then they get fined or they get disqualified. It's not the technician's problem. It is a problem of the regulation that is overzealous and does nothing to protect safety. It
Well-
increases cost across the board.
I
I
understand
can afford
exactly-
the cost, okay? I have the money. But there are so many people who cannot do that, and it's a ridiculous regulation.
having been caught in it a couple of times, because I have kids whose cars I help support also, I fully understand where you are, and I actually went back to some of the repair shops and said, we did these last year? Really? Like, is there a problem? And they took care of it without charging me a second year in a row. So I agree with you. There's something that needs to be fixed. I truly thought that we had done something
A
last.
fix was made, so maybe it hasn't been fixed well enough, so.
Yeah, so we'll look into this because this is
So I
something
reviewed the
that,
regulation, which was updated in 2024.
Okay.
That's what the shop that I was working with, which is a highly reputable shop. I won't name them at their defense. But they're following the regulation that was updated in 2024.
okay.
And it's uncalled for.
It's still not working.
It's uncalled for.
Okay, that's good feedback, and thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll
I had a question,
Yeah.
a little more philosophical. So I'm curious in like in Montpelier. I know it's not the committees that you're working on. Who in Montpelier today is being really concerned about things happening in the area of immigration and migrants, asylum seekers in Vermont, with a lot of new things coming on high that we hear about in Chicago but can't imagine in Jericho. If you could just say a few words about like who's concerned with this in Montpelier and what they're doing about it and what protections they're putting into place for people's civil rights and also just maybe ethically for a country of immigrants. So thanks.
I'm not in that space right now, so. Other than what I know is happening out there, yeah.
Yeah, we are actually part of the longest border with another country. Our Swanton region is the longest border with Canada, right, of all of the border regions that the United States has. So we have and we recently had a very sad death with one of our border guards that I can't, it's almost a soap opera, the story, if you keep reading the information that is unfolding about that. And I was up at the border for a briefing earlier this month, late last month. So we are, let's see, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. There is an onslaught of changes coming out of the federal government right now that I don't know that any state can deal with well. The changes to the funding that came out last night could have far-reaching impacts on our university's ability to hold programs, to to do research, to our arts council, even having one, to I mean, it's just an incredibly wide-ranging thing. We have concerns about how do we keep our students safe? How do we keep our workforce safe? How do people feel safe going to work, right? If they're concerned about, so I think we're all paying attention, and there's so many things that we can't react to all of them fast enough, and we don't know which ones to react to first. And I think some of that, my opinion, is by design coming out of the federal government. So I don't have a good answer for you. I know that there are a lot of us that are deeply concerned, watching, trying to figure out which of these changes is going to stick, which is legal, constitutional, and then wanting to react to those and not waste our resources and energy reacting to the things that are going to be found quickly unconstitutional or blocked or, So it's not an easy place to be right now for any of us, and it's a good question. So I don't know if you have a follow-up or if you have a...
No, and I know it wasn't an easy question,
Yeah.
but I just felt like there's an elephant in the room generally, and in all our communities.
This is Pat Bird. I have a follow-up. I'm wondering if you guys are communicating with the Attorney General. I know that, I'm assuming Vermont was part of the 22-state coalition that got the injunction against the birthright citizenship executive order. I don't know this, but there were 22 states, and so I'm thinking likely Vermont was one of them. So my question is the legislator in communication with the Attorney General on what she is considering challenging or what she's not considering challenging, what her strategy is in terms of follow-up on some of these things? I know the grant writing one that you're talking about has to be like a tidal wave because there's grant writing everywhere.
In every sector.
Everywhere. Healthcare, education, public safety, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my question.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if it's for a fact, but I would be very surprised if leadership in both the House and the Senate is not in conversation with the Attorney General, okay? I'm not personally, but, and knowing Charity Clark as I know her, I'm sure these are the kinds of conversations she's seeking out to have with folks and probably taking the temperature or trying to figure out how best to move forward. And I suspect she would be very proactive in any of these kinds of situations. Other folks? Yes.
One other comment to make with regard to the, another comment to make with regard to the clean energy bill. And I think the commission's report recently that came out on that.
A couple weeks ago.
And as influenced by the recent changes from the elections and so forth, the puzzle that I have as a homeowner that uses heating oil to heat my home is that that bill does nothing to incentivize change other than penalize homeowners who use fossil fuels, as opposed to providing an incentive to move forward. So my comment in this regard would be get rid of that bill and move forward on the alternative side with an incentive program for making change.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot of questions, a lot of conversation on the clean heat standard. I understand that. Certainly the change in the legislature will force that issue. I think it's important to note that the research and the report that came out of the Public Utilities Commission that was reported in the House just last week, I guess, or a couple weeks ago, that the increase for like home fuel would be like 7 or 8 cents a gallon or something, and of course for the longest time,
But
for the
that
long.
estimate does not include the whole impact of the costs,
No,
which
no.
I think you know.
And the incentivizing is coming, the fuel dealers, to go to folks and say, to help you with those types of things, whether it's weatherization, whether it's changing out mechanical systems in your house. They're the ones,
That's not a part of the bill.
Can I slow the bill, the most recent bill that became law, set up the study. The study came back, there is no new bill to put any of these changes, any of the reported on changes into effect. So the legislature said, we're going to do a study, find out more information. Do we have the systems to put any of this in place? Does this thought make sense? The PUC, the Public Utility Commission, did a good job on a study. The information that came back said we're probably not ready at this exact moment to make any of these changes. I don't think, my opinion, that that will happen, that anything will be going forward with that this year. I think that the information from that study looks like we have more to do to make sure that this can go forward in a way that is affordable, like we've been talking about, and incentivizes the right behaviors. So I think that your analysis right now is pretty spot on with the report, and that we have to think about this a little differently. And so that means go back to the drawing board and figure out, is there a better way to do this that will work for where we are today? So I don't want to get into the bill said this, the bill said that, because there isn't a bill that we're talking about pushing for, going forward with in this moment.
Thank you.
Yep.
We have time for one more question.
I'm so sorry to miss your.
So Trevor was exactly right. We are scheduled to do this the last Tuesday of every month here at the library, 6 to 7 p.m. February, March, April, and May are the next. So it's on the library's calendar. Trevor will put it on Front Porch Forum, or maybe I will, but probably Trevor will, the week-ish before we are here. If you have questions for us, please reach out. We do our best to get answers to everybody as quickly as we can. Yeah,
and I do, to your point about emails and reaching out to us, sometimes just by how busy we are and the volume of emails we get, that sometimes we don't always respond. Sometimes it's not sure whether there's a question attached to that email or just a statement. And but I assure you that if you're a constituent of mine, I read your email. So even if you may not get a direct response, I do read them all.
yeah. And if you want to,
On a hopeful note, like what are you most excited about or most hopeful about moving forward for this year?
I think there's a lot of excitement about collaboration this year. And I'm feeling really hopeful about that. I'm feeling really hopeful that when, like, the education issue is coming up, people are coming together and saying, how do we work together to make a better Vermont, a better system for Vermonters, and to set us up for success in the future? And it's super collaborative right now, and that's very hopeful for me.
That, and one of the things I've been working on for a number of years is the criminal justice system and how under-resourced it has been, and the impact that the pandemic in particular had on the entire system. And I've been working with the judiciary committees, both in the Senate and the House, to properly right-size and really get into all the different pieces and parts. And we're starting to, by the metrics that we've established to look at, we're starting to see those positive impacts from that. You may not feel it out there necessarily because when you read the news, it's usually negative. But But I am seeing it, and it's been great just to see that success and to be able to accomplish that kind of work. So thanks for asking the question.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, really appreciate it.